So I'm recording this video in October of 2021, and I have definitely noticed over the last few years there has been a erosion of trust in public officials and experts of all kinds, not just government officials, but also scientists, people that were normally looked up to with authority that are now being questioned. Now, there's various reasons for why this is happening, but I'm going to cover in this video a few of the instances that I believe were major blows to the standing of public trust in experts and officials. Honestly, I could probably turn this into a video series just covering various things that happen in the news that make people lose faith in public officials, so, this video is not by any means a comprehensive list. The very first instance that I'm going to cover is that in many counties across America, in many cities such as San Diego, states like Wisconsin, cities like Boston, public officials have declared that racism is a public health crisis. Now, typically, when most people think of a public health crisis, they'll think of some kind of new virus or new disease that is spreading around, some kind of physical, tangible, biological thing that you can study in a lab and maybe look at under a microscope. Now, racism isn't really much of a biological disease, more as it is a way of looking at the world, a way of thinking, a way of acting. It's not quite comparable to something like a virus or a bacteria. So when public health officials come out and say that racism is a public health crisis, it makes people start to doubt those public health officials, thinking they are just trying to virtue signal. They're not actually looking out for public health. Now, in all fairness, these public health officials do have reasons behind their declaring of racism a public health crisis, but to the average person, this just comes off as more or less virtue signaling. Now, that instance came from various unnamed officials across the country, but there is one health official, a Dr. Anthony Fauci, that a lot of people have been looking up to and taking advice from during the coronavirus pandemic. However, he did one thing that I think he should not have done. I understand why he did it. He explained it very well, but it's still a bad idea in my opinion. He lied to people very early on about whether or not they were going to need to wear masks. I understand he didn't want people to panic buy all the masks to make sure that people in hospitals would still be able to get some. But when you, a public health official, come and tell people, no, you don't need to worry about this and wear masks, people believe you. So then when you come out later and give the real good advice of, yes, you should wear a mask to prevent the spread of disease, people will say, well, no, that's contradicting what you said earlier. And then when you admit that you lied to them because you didn't think they could handle it, a lot of people just start to doubt you and they think, oh, what else is he going to lie to us about? Now, what you think and how you feel about Dr. Fauci is your own thing, but it is a non-debatable fact that he did lie about masks early on in the pandemic. He has admitted this himself. Again, he has his reasons for doing it, but he still did it. Now, those were examples of anonymous public health officials or named public health officials, but what about corporations? Shortly before the voting day of the 2020 election, a story came out from the New York Post about the son of Democratic candidate Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, leaving his laptop at a repair shop in Delaware. I'm not going to get into all the details of that story, but the long story short of it is that that story would have been potentially damaging to Joe Biden. It would not have made him or his son look good. Immediately upon the story being released, Twitter blocked the spread of it. You could not DM someone the link to it, you could not tweet out the link for the story, and Facebook did shortly after, the two biggest social media sites in the entire planet, both in effect working together to suppress people talking about this story. Now, on the right-wing echo chamber, this only amplified it and brought even more attention to it. But let's be honest, a story that was damaging to Joe Biden was probably going to get big in the right-wing chamber anyway. Now, after the election was over, it was revealed that this story was in fact legitimate and not Russian disinformation, as many of the major news corporations reported it to be at the time. The reason this is concerning is because the reasons that the companies gave for censoring the story didn't add up to previous news stories. Twitter said that they censored the story because they had a policy of not publishing hacked or stolen documents, despite publishing Trump's tax returns very shortly before that with absolutely no repercussions of the same. I believe Facebook had a policy about unverified stories not being published, despite many anonymously sourced stories from the Trump administration being published on their website with absolutely no problem. This presented a clear bias to a lot of people. The last instance that I'm going to cover in this video was an instance that happened from 60 Minutes with Ron DeSantis. Now, 60 Minutes has a reputation for being very respectable and good journalists. So it was very concerning to a lot of people when they were caught deceptively editing an interview they did with Ron DeSantis. To make a long story short, they asked him about a company that donated to him getting awarded a contract to care for people. And the answer that was shown on 60 Minutes was much, much shorter than the actual answer that he gave. And if you watch the full answer and you watch 60 Minutes version, it is very clearly selectively edited to include, or I should say, to not include all of the actual good parts of his answer that explained how he was not biased in picking this company that happened to donate him, that was actually just the best company for the job. Now, whether you believe 60 Minutes version or you believe Ron DeSantis' version, that's up to you, but the fact of the matter remains that 60 Minutes definitely did leave out a lot of footage from his answer in a way that made his answer to be not as legitimate as he originally intended. Now, none of the instances I covered here are by themselves enough to turn someone into a conspiracy theorist who doesn't trust any authority or government or any experts whatsoever. But the combination of these things is enough to make at least the average person maybe at least start to guess some of the authority, and an overly suspicious person to just full on doubt them. To have multi-billion-dollar corporations, journalists, and public and national health officials be caught openly lying is major blows to the trust and credibility of all these organizations. And as long as they continue to do so, people are going to continue not believing in them. Now, obviously, as we've learned, people not believing in their public health institutions can have very bad consequences on a nation. So it's important that they get theirs together and improve their reputation.